Today's guest understands leadership where it actually counts, under pressure, with real consequences, and with a team depending on you. Mark Fava is a former U.S. Navy officer who served as an admiral's aide early in his career, a role that gave him a front row seat to high-stakes decision-making, disciplined teamwork, and leadership at the highest levels. He's now an accomplished attorney and the author of Lessons from the Admiral, Naval Wisdom, and Sea Stories for Leaders. What I really appreciate about Mark's work is that it's not theory, it's earned experience. Powerful sea stories and practical insights, he distills timeless lessons on teamwork, trust, preparation, and leading with clarity under pressure. His work bridges the gap between military precision and civilian leadership, offers leaders at every level a roadmap for building resilient teams and making sound decisions when it matters most. Mark, it's really great to interview a shipmate. Welcome to the conversation.
Absolutely, Clint. You know, we both spent 6 years in the Navy, about the same time frame, so it's always fun to catch up with somebody else that served in that same time frame.
Absolutely. Yeah, this was pre-internet, and there was no, you didn't get email. You like the mail cod to come on and bring your physical letters. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, everybody had an FPO or APO box, and you waited for mail call.
You did, and you'd hope. My wife used to number the letters so that I would make sure I read them in order, because I'd get 10 at a time. So you had to number them in case you wanted to keep the story straight.
Exactly.
So I like to think of all the people that come on the podcast as superheroes, and all superheroes have an origin story. And what's yours? What made you from? I know your dad was in the military, but what made you? How did you get to where you are today, basically?
Sure. Yeah. As you said, Dad was a Navy captain, and as most families, we moved around every couple of years. He was in the Supply Corps, but gosh, we had probably done 5 or 6 moves, including Guam, Hawaii, Washington D.C., here in Charleston, and a couple other places by the time we got to high school, and that was in Charleston, South Carolina. And by then, Dad decided to settle down here. And that was, this became home. Came time for college. He said, if you want to go out of state, you got to get a scholarship. So, the options. It was Clemson or South Carolina at the time. You being from South Carolina also. But there was a Naval ROTC program up in Chapel Hill, and I really liked the commanding officer. The Naval ROTC program at South Carolina had a Marine colonel as the commanding officer, and I didn't think I was going to fit in very well there. So I went to Chapel Hill, did 6 years in the Navy as a naval flight officer at the height of the Cold War, in the back of a P-3 chasing Soviet submarines around the world. Became a legal officer in the squadron and really enjoyed that. And then the JAG said to me, hey, why don't you, if I ever think about becoming an admiral's aide? My first tour was down in Jacksonville, Florida. And he said, why don't you, I said, where would I do that? He goes, up at the admiral's headquarters in Brunswick, Maine. And I said, not only no, but hell no. I'm just, I'm a Southern boy. I'm in Jacksonville for a reason. I had just met.
How about Brunswick, Georgia? That might be better.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, is that the Brunswick you're talking about? Because I know there's good food there, and I ended up going there, and it was the best tour of my life because I worked for an incredible leader. I learned things that were banging around in my head for 35 years. I went to law school back at South Carolina, and stayed in the reserves for another 24 years. But the book is really something that I wrote because I was, as you mentioned, I was doing these things and had these habits, and they all originated from that, 18, 19 months when I was an admiral's aide.
Yeah, I can understand the whole Marine Corps thing because right in between high school and joining the Navy, I joined at 18 as well. But when I worked for my dad on Paris Island, actually, he was he was a contractor. We had the contract for steam. And so I remember being up in the bucket truck and working on the steam lines up in the air, and watching the drill instructors run backwards faster than the other guys could run forwards. And when there's nobody around, hey, they would practice and yell and scream. And I thought, I don't know what I'm doing, but it ain't that.
Right. Well, that was the same. We did the obligatory college tour with my dad. We were going to go to South Carolina, Chapel Hill, then to your master's place to Duke. And then I think it was Vandy and Georgia Tech were next. And when we got to South Carolina, the CO was the Marine colonel. He says, we have a different attitude here. Everybody stands watch. You wear, rather than wearing the uniform once a week, you wear it 3 times a week. And I'm like, God, if I'd want that, I'd go to the Academy or the Citadel. Nothing against those schools. They're excellent schools. That wasn't what I was looking for. And the CO at Chapel Hill was just the opposite. 1 time a week, you can join a fraternity. You can do whatever you want to do once you enjoy campus experience. And I looked at Dad, said, we don't need to go anywhere else. This is where I want to go. And ironically, the person that gave me the tour of the Chapel Hill campus was the Marine gunny, who I ended up befriending very well. And in spite of his efforts for 4 years to make me a Marine, we were great friends.
So it's funny. I got a personal story, but the person at the I was married, and so I didn't stay on base. I lived off campus or off base, and the guy next to me was Dave Marriott. He's like related 15th cousin or whatever to the Marriott family.
Yeah.
But he was a Marine, and well, I guess I should say he is a Marine because they're
right. Never not.
So we would we'd carpool into the Bay Norfolk Naval Station a lot, NOB, and he told me one day, he says, how come, he says, you're the most squared away sailor I ever met. Why don't you join the Marines? He says, I actually put in a transfer to try to join the Marines and I wasn't allowed, which brings up another story. This is not my story, but I love this story. So one of the guys that works for us is Rocky Rossiker. He's a retired Marine. He did, I think he puts it 20 years and 20 minutes in the Marine Corps and retired. But he was interviewing to sit on Senator McCain's staff. And so he goes in and Senator McCain gets introduced and McCain goes, Marine Corps, huh? He says, I was going to join the Marines. And then they found out my parents were actually married. And so everybody's yucking it up and laughing. And Rocky says, Senator, I've heard a lot of Navy guys say they almost joined the Marines. I never heard a Marine say they almost joined the Navy. And Senator McCain said,
that's so true.
This man.
Well, this same gunny, I'm a freshman, and he would call me in every week after drill and make me stand in front of his desk at parade rest watching motivational films. So he'd have the old projector on there, and he'd start something going to be like the sands of Iwo Jima.
I can still hear the noise.
And then he would yell at me after about 20 minutes and said, have you come to your senses yet? I said, no, Gunny, get the hell out of my office, And then the next week I came in and, if you were Navy option, you had a black name tag. If you were Marine option, you had a red name tag. And Lord forbid I come in his office and on the desk was a red name tag that said Fava. And he says, it's yours for the taking. I said, I'm not there, Gunny. And then come to attention and watch another motivational film. So, we became best friends, but I never came to my senses.
Awesome. This is your first book. What inspired you to write it?
Yeah, I've always enjoyed writing, and that sort of led me to law school. So, needless to say, as a litigator and as a lawyer, you're always writing. And it was, there's so much bad to come out of COVID. There was some good to come out of COVID. A lot of time and self-reflection, and that's what I decided when I decided to do it. I never watched a lot of TV before. I started watching stupid shows like Schitt's Creek and Netflix, and this is a waste of time. So I actually had 5 or 10 pages of notes somewhere in a folder that were probably 15 or 20 years old or older from this time that I'd taken. And I just turned those into the book. It took about 2 years to write. And that was it. The other thing is I've been telling my daughters these stories for 3 years, including stories about the Marines and being lost on a ship. And they finally said, Dad, we've already heard that a bunch. So why don't you just put it in a book? I said, okay. So that's what I did. And it was a bucket list item. So it was just really great to see. And you, having been through the process, knows, you reach that pinnacle and you're like, I can't do this anymore. And then when you finally start seeing the PDF layout and the cover, it starts to get real. And then they ship you the first box of books and you're like, okay, I've done it. It's really neat.
Well, for those who aren't well-versed in the Navy hierarchy or Navy ranks, where does an admiral fall in that for the listeners who maybe don't know about that?
Sure. So we've got our enlisted ranks, with the senior of those being, as you mentioned, E1 through E4, 5, and then you've got chief, senior chief, and master chief. In the Navy, then you have the officer ranks. The ensign is the beginning. Then you go up lieutenant, JG, lieutenant, commander, and then captain, and then admiral. So and captain in the Navy is the equivalent in the Marines is colonel, and the same in it's an 06 in the Air Force and the Army. So the admiral is what we would call the first flag rank, often called a general in the Army and definitely in the Marine Corps. And there's, the stars go up 1 through 4 or 5, I guess.
And sometimes there's a Commodore. Is there still a Commodore anymore?
Yeah, Commodore can be a senior captain that, would be called the Commodore because the position is such that they're over, a group of ships or, when I was in the P3 community, same thing. We had 6 squadrons and the captain was called the Commodore because he was the captain over those 6 squadrons.
Then you got that gray area between enlisted and officers called chief warrant officers. We won't go there. That's a whole nother.
Very good leaders. Very smart. Yeah.
So as an admiral's aide, what exactly was your role? What did you do?
Yeah. I talk a lot about that in the book. And again, your number one responsibility was to make sure that the Admiral's day from the beginning to the end, it was executed flawlessly, right? And that meant something maybe as trivial as, making sure they got a ride on time or making sure they got to point A to point B on time, which wasn't trivial, but helping with speeches, going to meetings with them. Something as simple as we're getting ready to walk into a room and meet somebody who I know he met 6 months ago. And as we're walking, I would just say, now, Admiral, you met Captain Jones 6 weeks ago. Remember his wife's name is Janie, blah, blah, blah. And he'd walk right up and, hey, Captain, hey, how you been? It's been about 6 weeks since we saw each other. How's your wife Janie doing or something? I mean, that's it. To the extent you can make their lives, which are incredibly hectic, better, and the execution of what they want to do more flawless, that's what you do. And it was phenomenal because I say this in the book. When I got the job, he said, you're going to do some things that are well below your pay grade, aren't going to be fun. You're going to do some things that are well above your pay grade. Because I was just a lieutenant, right? I'd only been in four years. And on the staff, everybody outranked me. But he said, I need you to do both equally well. So, do the crappy job well, do the high visibility job well. No difference as far as he was concerned.
So I imagine, since that role has some importance to it, that it's probably reserved for people with bright futures, and you must have demonstrated some high potential to get nominated for that position. What early experiences really shaped your approach to leadership, even before you became an officer?
Yeah. Gosh, I think clearly my book is dedicated to my mom and dad. So clearly, the work ethic of my parents, the integrity, the faith of them, and then the ability not to accept a door that closes to you, right? And that was really it. And then the old hit the deck running. So even before the Admiral told me to do the crappy job as well, when I got to my first squadron in Jacksonville as a lieutenant junior grade, all my buddies got, you're going to be a division officer in the maintenance, you're going to be an assistant ops, you're going to be this, that, and the other, and they had to lead troops. And they looked at me and said, Mark, you're going to be the navigations, logs, and records officer. I said, what's that? They said, all you got to do is take care of the chart room and then make sure everybody's flight time gets put in their logs. And they said, right now it's a mess. We're behind. The chart room's terrible. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, I went to college and got a degree and got wings to go do this. But I turned it into with the help of a chief, I turned it into the best chart room in the hangar. We updated everything. We had to update inventory charts that were out of date, which were not good, were updated. Everybody's logbooks were then accurate. And that's a big deal for the pilots, not as big for the naval flight officers. And that was it. I mean, just that hit the deck running very early on, established a reputation that carried me through the next 3 years of the squadron. And I tell people that all the time. Boy, you come out strong early, that's what people remember. You come out poor as a doofus early, it's very difficult to recover.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't tell this in my son here because he's a senior in high school. He's going to go to Auburn in the fall. But I did that at Georgia Tech. So basically when I got there, I was an older student, having been in the Navy for 6 years first. But most people, they don't do well their first couple of semesters, and then they spend the rest of their academic career trying to get their GPA back up.
Right.
The opposite. My first I think we were on the quarter system. I think after my first year, I had a 3.9.
Wow. Now,
what I did was I wrote that down to have fun later when all the hard classes happened. I was able to go still have fun. But I'd highly recommend, if you're a freshman, work hard the first year.
Yes.
You should work hard all 4 years.
Absolutely. Same advice for this, for graduate school and for law school. First year, when I talk to law students or mentor them, they say, what's the most important thing? I said, look, I hate to say this, the most important thing is your academics. You can go do student bar, you can go play sports, intramural sports. You can do this. You can go to the Carolina game on the weekend. I said, but let me tell you something. If you don't finish strong out of the box, it's not good. And I was the opposite of you. I've always been a 3.2 sailor. So, it started around the 3.0. And then if I could just build it up, by second or third year in law school to a 3.2, 3.3, it was good. But, in law school today, that first semester, and I'm sure it's the same in graduate school, sets you up for an internship, which, you get in with a good firm or a good company that very early on, you're done. I mean, it sets everything up to roll for the next 2 years.
Yeah, it really does. Those first impressions really carry a lot of weight.
Yeah.
Now, there's a new term for me. I'd never heard of in 6 years in the Navy, but that's probably because I was I was in the bowels of the boat as an E4, down in the boiler room running a switchboard. But the Admiral referred to you as the loop. What
Yeah.
what is the loop? What does that mean?
Yes. Aviators all have nicknames or call signs, not as much in not as much in the P3 community as those our friends and jet jocks on the carriers. They all have call signs. But, the nice thing about being an aide is even though you might be the most junior person, you're always wearing a gold braid, the aiguilette. The more admirals stars you represent, or sorry, the higher the admiral is, the thicker that thing is. So I was with a 1-star, soon to be 2-star admiral. It was just a double rope that was worn on the left shoulder. As you get higher, chief naval operations, aide to the president, those things are pretty big, and you can tell it's a wonderful visual. So, he would call me the Loop. That was it, because he always had a Hey, Loop, come here. Loop, do this. Loop, do that. And that was a term of affection. As long as he was saying the Loop, things were good. Sort of like being a parent. As soon as he changed to, Lieutenant Fava, get in here, I knew something was going sideways. But so the Loop was the affectionate name he gave me in a term of endearment, much like, we would say on a ship, shipmate, and he called people shipmate too.
Yeah. So, I love the stories, by the way, there. I'm a storyteller myself, and I really enjoyed reading all the different stories that you told.
Thank you.
And I know that obviously all the lessons you put in the book have some are impactful, or they wouldn't have been included. But was there like one at the top of your list that was really the most formative lesson you learned from him?
Yeah, not to be a spoiler, but it was the last chapter, right? So I was, as you had mentioned, I was very lucky. Competitively, I came out of the squadron ranked number one of an officer award room of 60. And that was just, it was a lot of hard work. And that allowed me to become the aide. And then about a year and a half into it was a 2-year position. About a year and a half into it, the Admiral got picked up for a 2nd star. And he said, listen, I'm going to Norfolk. I'm going to go be the head Admiral in Norfolk, which at the time was a 2-star. So the head of the base, the world's largest naval base at that time, was him. And he said, I'd love for you to go with me. And I talk about that, and I won't go through the whole thing, but at the end of the book, it was the most difficult decision. And because back then, Clint, if an aide who was the prima donna, the best of the best for the Admiral, then decides he or she is getting out of the Navy, it's not good. It's not a good signal for his or her retention. And the way he handled that decision, because I thought I was going to get fired, showed me and taught me how you handle people and be a good leader.
Yeah, he did that several places, and I was going to get to this question later, but one of the things he did that I really liked and that I try to do with people on my team is if there was any mistakes made, he took the hit.
Yeah.
And if there was good praise, he deflected it to you.
Yes.
And of course, you tell the story about how you also deflected it down to the person who actually wrote the speech, the PAO or POA. Anyway, the person who actually wrote the speech. And that's what I try to do. Is, to me, the leader is supposed to take the hit, but then pass the praise on to the people behind.
Yeah, it's a very simple philosophy, because when you do that, people really appreciate what you're doing, and they understand you're being humble. So to your point, someone would come up to the Admiral, and I did write most of his speeches, although he edited every single one of them with a red pen. And they would compliment him, and he would just say, well, thank you. And I'd be standing right next to him because I'm scrambling, taking his sword or taking his gloves or doing some aid stuff. And he'd just say, Loop here did it. And, okay, well, you didn't have to say that. He could have just said, thank you. I worked very hard on that. And so I think that's critical, and it transfers into the corporate world too, and also at the law firm.
I also appreciate how open you were, because according to you, you made a lot of mistakes. And he let you stay on as the Loop. He didn't fire you like he did one of his earlier ones. But, my favorite lines are when he called you in and say, don't let that happen again.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
He had a wonderful way of chewing me out where he never raised his voice and he never used profanity. I mean, I would know I was in trouble, and I would know I had screwed up, so to speak. And he would see the sweat beads on my forehead or the pins in my khaki uniform. And he would laugh, and he would say, I'm not going to fire you today. But then he'd look at me and say, don't ever let that happen again. And that's all he had to say. I got it, and it didn't happen again. And I just would lodge that in my list of things, of my checklist of things personally that I had to do and make sure it didn't happen again.
Yeah, I think that everybody's entitled to make mistakes. And when
Yeah.
people make the same mistake more than once, and I start to get frustrated because, we've had this talk and you did it
Right.
again.
Right. Right. And that's what happened with his first aide. There were multiple times where he would tell him something. He would say, "Sir, yes, sir." And then 3 days later it would happen again. And, the Admiral finally looked at him and said, "Look, you're not having a good time and I'm not having a good time. So why don't we end this relationship?" And the young man said, "Yes, sir."
But that guy did pretty well
He
afterwards,
did
right?
very
If I
well.
recall. Yeah.
He was not cut out to be an aide. I just was fortunate that I was. And again, to the Admiral's credit, he said, this was a pilot, a young pilot. He said, "What do you want to do?" He said, "Sir, I've always wanted to be an instructor pilot." He was a phenomenal pilot. He just wasn't a good aide. And you think that those skills would be transferable because it's execution and under pressure. He went on to be one of the best instructors in Kingsville, Texas, teaching young pilots how to fly. He just didn't have to worry about the Admiral's uniform and getting them from point A to point B. He did that with a plane instead.
Or maybe not having a helo pad on the ship he's going to visit and needing to get lowered. That was
Not
funny.
good. Attention to
Not good.
detail.
Yeah. Not good in your dress whites at all.
No, sir.
So, when you're young into the role, you're a lieutenant. How do you build rapport and credibility with the people that are superior to you?
Sure.
And I know you can always call on the loop and kind of leverage that, but even without the loop, how do you build credibility in peers or credibility with your peers and superiors, especially when you're young?
Yeah, yeah. I just, my current boss at work, who I've worked with for many years, he calls that threading the needle, right? How do you, especially on a staff as the aide, when you are the youngest person, transfer that to, a law firm where you're the most junior associate? How do you build that credibility? And I think it's just by demonstrating basic skills, the first of which is you listen for the first couple of months. You don't come in as a know-it-all, right? And then you help other people. So on the staff, if I knew somebody was going to be out for the day or somebody had a conflict and the Admiral said, "Where's Commander Jones?" And if I knew Commander Jones was out, I would just say, "Look, Admiral, he told me he's going to be out this afternoon, but I'd be happy to get in touch with him." And then I'd go to Commander Jones. I'd say, "Look, the boss is looking for you. I don't think it's that important that you got to leave your daughter's dance recital, but here's what he wants." And so instantly they say, "Hey, you know what? He's helped me. I'm going to help him." And, 3 weeks later, Commander Jones would run around and say, "Hey, I saw the pitch, the brief that you were putting together with the Admiral. Slide 6 is wrong. You've got a misspelling." I said, "Oh gosh. Okay." And that's how you build that credibility and rapport with somebody, even when they outrank you.
Right. I love the story about missing page 12 in the binder in the speech. So don't let that happen again. That was another one of those.
And it's funny because that is a habit again that I carry through even today, and especially not as much today because everything's electronic. But sure, if you're scanning something electronically, or better yet, you're sending out a PDF. Back in the old days, it was the same thing. It was photocopy machines or delivering a pleading to the court. Always checked that, and that's just attention to detail.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that one later as well, but that's another one of those core principles that maybe you can attribute to the Navy, but it's certainly something that has helped me in my career. When we do project management and we do plans and we print Gantt charts to give to the team, back in the day when you would print them and not actually have PDFs, I have had to cancel, move a flight to a Saturday because I wasn't going to make it because I found a mistake in the Gantt chart and I needed to stay another 3 hours and reprint it.
Right.
And that's just, to me, that was, first of all, you have to be able to see the problem. Most people just print it and hand it over and they're gone, but you have to go through and say, is page 12 actually there or not?
Right.
And then you realize you've got to misprint, you've got to do it over. But to me, that was just the job.
Yeah. I mean, in your world, that was it, right? In my world, it was legal pleadings. Today, it's the same thing. It's presentations. And if you present something that's I mean, the worst thing, I hate when I send out a document and I catch a typo afterwards. So, have a great executive assistant, have somebody look at it, check it and double check it. After you've worked on it 10 times, you might not even see your own mistake. But remember, whatever work product you produce is a reflection of you. And for the Admiral, it had to be excellent. As an engineer or as a project manager, you got to be right. You can make a mistake, but nothing sloppy. And today, Even when I see court pleadings and there's a misspelling or something wrong in them, I immediately roll my eyes and say, I don't want to know how much you were charging an hour and you've got a misspelling in a document. Come on.
You do know they make spell check, right? I mean, come on.
Yeah.
It's one thing to have improper grammar, but at least have spell check.
Right. I mean, if it's underlined or highlighted in Word, there's a reason for that.
Now, early in the book, it might have been one of the first lessons you had, but it says it's really important to understand what your boss's expectations of you are. Yeah. And when I think about that from a project management perspective, one of the things that's important is clarity, right? Clarity is your friend, and knowing what the expectations are, what, in our case, what the project's supposed to deliver, but in your case, it's what your boss's expectations are. And then you also said that behind closed doors, he allowed you to speak freely, but then once you left the room, your position had to be his position, and that was a united front. And in the service, I can make the argument maybe that's a little easier because of the rank structure, and you will do as I do as long as I'm above you in the hierarchy. But when you get into the corporate world, what does alignment really look like in practice? I mean, not agreement necessarily, but at least operational alignment. What does that look like?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's not as rigid as the military, but I still think there's a sense of unity. Even in my current employer, we've got a mission statement. We've got, I've got a card that hangs on the back of my ID lanyard that talks about the values of the company. And guess what? The CEO's all team meeting a couple weeks ago, he starts with that chart. That here are the values. Here's what we aspire to be and how we aspire to treat people. And I think operationally, again, you should always allow people the license to disagree diplomatically, but you got to be aware of the context within which you're doing it, right? So I might be listening to a meeting, maybe another vice president is pitching, and I hear him or her say something that, I just grimace. It might not be the time to come right out of the meeting and disagree, right? It might be better diplomatically offline to say, hey, we should probably talk about this. But you've got to decide if it is the time, to say it in the meeting and how you're going to say it. And I think so many people lose that ability to, as I said earlier, thread the needle without throwing somebody under the bus, right? Nobody likes to be publicly humiliated or publicly shamed. At that same time, you're not in the position to be a yes man. You're just not. That's not what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to speak your mind and the truth and maintain your integrity. So I think operationally, that's sort of how it has transferred.
Again, I put things in my context because my day job is running projects. And, we have to start off with a thing called the project charter, which is where we agree on the scope of the project.
Yes.
And one of the things we try to preach in that session is, listen, if you have a disagreement, now is the time. Because when we leave this room, and so I like to say that maybe, Mark, maybe you're a super stubborn person and I'm super stubborn and you think we should go north and I think we should go south. And we're neither one of us are going to come off of our opinion. We both are invested in it, right?
Right.
But what we talk about is if the rest of the team agrees with you that we should go north, then what I will do as a team member is I will agree to help you move in the wrong direction because you didn't change my mind. I still think we should be going south, but I will support you in moving north. It's kind of like what the Admiral did was we can disagree behind the doors. When we leave, you got to push my point.
Yeah, and to the point that, I got it. But he would give me the open audience to disagree behind closed doors, and he would listen to me. I mean, and some people don't ever, give people that amount of license. He said, and I remember very clearly, don't let me do anything stupid because you're the only one in the room who will probably say you can't or shouldn't do that because everybody else is very high ranking. They might be a little bit afraid of speaking up and disagreeing with him. And he allowed me that complete license to check him behind closed doors, which I thought was, absolutely wonderful.
How do you walk that line between healthy dissent and destructive dissent, on a team? How do you manage that?
Yeah, again, I think it goes back to the timing and the delivery, right? I mean, I never tell somebody I think they're messed up in an email because, gosh, and people do that all the time. I mean, it's just the wrong mechanism for delivery. The better thing to do is pick up the phone. No one likes to pick up the phone anymore. Matter of fact, we don't even have phones in our offices anymore. We don't have landlines. You're lucky. You get a text and, you talk about your son. I'll rat on my daughters. I'll say, you got to pick up the phone and call the office if you want an appointment. Well, I texted them or I did this. So you got to figure out the form to communicate it within. And if it's adverse, I've always found that voice-to-voice communication is good. face-to-face is best. Because the delivery is critically important. You know, the context of an email can be very easily misunderstood and misread, depending on the tone the reader puts into it, as opposed to the tone the writer had intended to put into it.
Yeah, for those of you who've listened to the podcast, you probably heard this story before, but to me, it's like playing telephone when you're a kid.
Yeah.
And the first kid has, if you don't know the game, the first kid has a secret that he whispers to the second kid, who then whispers on to the third and on down the line. And of course, the fun of that game is that what the last person says the secret is not remotely close to what the secret actually started off being.
Right.
And that's what makes the game fun. Well, the problem is that still happens in the business world, except it's not fun.
Right.
And a leader stands up and says what he believes or she believes to be a very clear message, because in their mind it's crystal clear, right?
Yeah.
And I'm reminded of Jack Nicholson on A Few Good Men. Is it clear? Crystal, you know, it's crystal clear, because I had the idea, so I'm communicating, and then I'm upset when what I think is a very clear direction doesn't get followed. And when I was writing my second book, I learned there's a difference between communication and conversation.
Yeah.
And when you're having those one-way dialogues, you are communicating. But now, to your point, I'm hearing the message through the way that I define terms, through my filters, through my biases, and frankly, whether I'm having a bad day or not. Right. I mean, how many times have you read an email, slept on it, and the next day you're like, okay, I don't know what I was thinking. It's not that bad.
Yeah.
And so we have to have a conversation, like to your point. Pick up the phone, have a conversation, and call the person and say, hey, what did you mean by this? And here's what I'm doing. Is this what you want? Is it right? But people don't want to do that. They want to check it off their list and just do a text or do a post on Slack and be done, when they should have a conversation.
Yeah. Listen, and I learned my lesson as a hothead litigator. I know you're from Atlanta, so I had this case for a major air carrier in the Southeast. It's a law firm, and it involved a passenger, a disabled passenger who was covered by the ADA, and the air carrier had made a mistake resulting in the injury of the passenger, and it was just an honest mistake. But obviously, we were sued for negligence, and it was not a good story, because there was some allegations that there were failure to follow policies and procedures about, you know, lifting the passenger and doing this and belting them and gosh, I drew a lawyer on the other side that was just one of the most aggressive, hard-nosed jerks as a plaintiff's attorney. And I've got a lot of friends that are that way, and they're great people. And we were duking it out, and we were fighting over some document production. And same thing, late one Friday afternoon, to your point, it'd been a bad day. I was tired. He was demanding more documents. And I said, you know, I got on the phone with him. I said, you're not getting any more. And then he sent me another email, you know, and finally I wrote an email saying, you're not getting any more damn documents. If you want anything else from me, take it up with the judge. Hit send. I felt so great about myself. Went home, had dinner with my family. Then I started thinking, I don't know if I should have done that. Monday morning, you know, walk into the office at 07 a.m. It was back in the days of the old fax machine, and rolling off the fax machine was like 20 pages of documents. And that's what it was. He had filed it. He's getting ready to, he said, Mark, if you'd like to discuss this, it'll be filed with the court at 9 a.m. And it was an affidavit saying, you know, that I was not operating in good faith. I think I might have even cussed at him on the phone, which was not good at all. And then he attached it. That was his affidavit, was Exhibit A. The email was Exhibit B, where I said, take it up with the judge. And it was a motion for sanctions and a motion to compel. And he said, you know, he'd give me till 9 o'clock before he filed it with the judge. Just picked up the phone, immediately called him, and, you know, wondering, he picks up, he goes, hey, Mark, I thought I'd hear from you this morning. I said, all right, I'm sorry. You know, but in the heat of passion, when things weren't going well, when I was in a bad mood, to your point, you know, that communication was improper.
It feels good at the time, but boy,
it felt great when I hit send. Didn't feel great when I saw the facts and I picked it up and it said motion to compel and for sanctions, because the sanctions would be against me as a lawyer because I had failed to comply with the ethical rule of negotiating in good faith.
It's like when you win an argument with your wife and you walk away, well, that one, no, it did not. It did not go well. You won the war, a battle, but you lost the war, my friend.
Pick your battles. Yes, sir.
So we open this podcast every week with the quote from George Bernard Shaw that says, the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Yeah.
You know, what communication practices do set exceptional leaders apart from just decent ones or good ones?
Yeah, I think always, as I mentioned, always being on point and stressing maybe the mission of the top 3 or 4 most important points, and then saying them over and over and over. If you send out a blast email, you might have 15-20% people read it or open it. The open rate would be relatively small. If you have a webcast, you start with that again. You begin your meetings with that again. So constant and consistent messaging, I think, is critically important. And you might get some eye rolls because people are like, oh, he or she always says that. But they have, there's no disagreement about where you stand and the goals and objectives that you're trying to reach. And I think that's been critically important. When I was in the squadron, I'm sure your ship and whatever ship you were on or whatever squadron or command you were in, there was always a mission statement, right? And so we knew exactly in the P3 squadron what our mission was. And we consistently referred to it. So being consistent and on message, I think, is critically important.
And when you're being consistent and on message, what advice can you share for being precise and intentional in your communication? Because I know for one of the truisms that I have in project management is black and white is your friend and gray is the enemy. Because if you leave something gray or ambiguous, it'll get used against you in the court of project management. Right. So when you look for clarity, what suggestions do you have there?
I think keep it short and sweet, right? I think some of the challenges I see in today's world into meetings, and I'm sure you see this in project management, you'll go into a room and, someone will throw up a PowerPoint with, 10-point font and so many lines. You're just like, you got to be kidding me. And then commence to read what they put up there. I mean, I'm a big proponent of the 3-bullet rule, right? 3 bullets, maybe, large font, very rare that they're going to go, down to a second line. But clear and concise communication. And I'm also a big fan of vetting it, doing a little bit of behind the scenes with a confidant that you trust. For me, believe it or not, the person I work with most closely is on my staff is a very bright data analyst. And, she looks at everything I put out. And I said, does this make sense? And when I say this, does it match up with what that is saying on the chart? So I think bouncing it off somebody else, we call it, beta testing beforehand, I think is critically important.
So how do you coach leaders to actually listen, not just hear, but to actually listen what the people around them are saying?
Yeah, it's very hard. But I think it's critical. I think I say this in the book, I might not be great at names, but I'm pretty good at remembering facts and circumstances about people, about their families, about their life. And that comes with listening. How many times have you gone up and talked to somebody and you're socializing with them or you're at a convention or something, and as soon as you start talking to them, they just start looking around the room, right? And they're looking for somebody else because, they've checked the box. They might not want to talk to you. You're not on the ladder that the person they want to talk to. But I think it's very important not only to listen, but to engage. And when you start a new job, good gracious, I don't care if you're the best project manager in the world or the best lawyer in the world, you come in and you figure it out because you don't come in with any credibility at all. Zero. The slate is clean. And I'll tell this to very senior military officers that retire, even admirals that want to come in and join our company or senior partners. You come in with zero credibility. You've got a wonderful resume, but and the way you build that credibility is, at least for the first couple months, listening. And if you're coming in with the leader, it's critically important to listen first. Now, you don't listen for 6 months. You listen for a little while, and then you need to execute. But you have to at least listen. And I tell people that's so critically important. And then engage, right? If somebody tells you, something's going on at home with their mother or blah, 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 next time you see them, just ask them, hey, how's it going? I know you said last time we talked, how was your mom? They know then you listen, right? And I think that's the relationship part of it. And then they end up caring as much about you and your mission and leadership as you purport to care about them.
Do you think there's a role that transparency plays in building trust within your team? Because it seemed like the Admiral was always pretty transparent, crystal clear with you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I talk sometimes about this, about, selling the proverbial, caca sandwich. You don't want to do it. We have to do it. And this typically was in the military. It's something nobody wants to do. To stand up there and say, this is a great thing. And, we're all going to be happy to do this. I remember standing up one time in front of the squadron at an all hands meeting, everybody, 350 people, I was a reserve commanding officer. everybody was complaining about something that we were having to do. And I just stood up and I acknowledged it. I said, listen, this is not comfortable. I don't want to do it, but we've been given orders to do it. And this is how we're going to do it. And, you got about 24 more hours to complain and then it's over. I don't want to hear any more complaining because we're going to execute, and that was after, weeks of complaining. But I think people immediately understood, look, I agreed. It wasn't ideal. It's not the path we or I would have picked, but it was the path we were directed to go down. We might not know all the reasons why, but okay, no one likes the constant complainer. And then what that does to morale across the unit when everybody's always complaining. Every drill weekend in the reserves, you show up and people are complaining. You're like, oh God, why am I even here? So I think that transparency is critically important, not only with, hey, time to put up or shut up, but also with, hey, I know this isn't the best thing since sliced bread and we don't want to do it, but we're going to do it.
Yeah, I remember on the ship I was in engineering, so I was in EDIV, and then you had the machine division and you had boiler division, et cetera. And one of the things that used to frustrate me the most is you'd pull into port after a long port visit, a long at sea period, 6-7 months.
Right.
And first of all, if you're in E division, you're first on, last off, right? Because you gotta pull shore power and go on ship's power for a period of 24 hours or so before you actually leave. So you're first on the pull shore power. Then you pull into port, everybody else is, after 6 months, everybody else is hitting the gangway and they're gone. And you're actually connecting shore power and all this, right?
Right.
So you get all your stuff done. You're like, okay, finally we can go. And then the engineering commander and division chief would say, hey, M division is having a problem, so we're going to stay here as a show of solidarity. And I'm like, I can't run around. What this is stupid, but if, you're stuck, you're going to stay.
Yeah, exactly. Be happy about it.
It was always helpful when the chief would say, we know it's stupid, but
yeah,
we have to do it. So
yeah, and that acknowledgement gives that person a little bit of credibility or a lot of credibility. You're like, okay, let's get this done, right?
Exactly.
No doubt.
And you're in a situation either in the military or in your civilian career where you had a person on your team who was technically competent or maybe even brilliant, but boy, they were poison in the well,
Yeah.
And how do you deal with that?
Gosh, I think a lot of professions are guilty of that. I mean, you might have the most technically proficient pilot who's the best stick at the airline or on the ship. You might have the best engineer at an engineering firm, or you might have the best lawyer in the courtroom. And a lot of times we assume that the best lawyer in the courtroom or at the law firm is also the best managing partner. And that's not the case, right? The best lawyer in the courtroom is the best lawyer in the courtroom, and he or she might be great at, being a rainmaker. They might not be the best leader. Matter of fact, somebody with an MBA that's not even a lawyer and some real world background might be the best leader. And I think that's just back to the hubris and realization that, that might be the case, right? The best technically proficient person might not be the best leader, and they surely might not communicate the way you would like them to communicate. And look, in my current company, we laugh about that all the time because I deal daily with brilliant engineers. And, they have their stereotypes about lawyers. I have my stereotypes about engineers, it's just like, and we've got a good humor about it, right? I'll say, well, you're right out of central casting for an engineer. And they'll say, well, you're a lawyer's lawyer, but you're not, I like you better than most lawyers. I say, okay, thank you. We're good. So let's figure out how to work this out.
One of the things you mentioned in the book that really resonated with me in the work that I do on teams is problems don't age well. And one of the challenges we have on project, and what I always tell people is, I'm on a project, I know if there's no problems and people aren't talking to me, they're not being honest, because there's going to be problems. And if the earlier you can find that problem, the better you are, because then you have more options to solve it. And when people have this innate desire to say, well, I'm going to fix it later and I'll never have to get the boss involved. And by the time they realize they can't and have to get the boss involved, the only option left is ugly, expensive, and frustrating.
Sure.
So how do you create an environment where people are willing to, ask for that help, as you talk about in the book?
Sure. I think number one is, everybody says, oh, we have an open door policy. Well, if you do, you better not take their head off when they come in and tell you something is bad, right? Or something's going sideways. So you want to encourage that level of communication. And often what I've done, if I think I'm going to be the bearer of bad news, the leader's going to want to know what all the facts are. So where is that time when you got to gather all the facts and tell the person who you report to, or you got to tell them right away? And often what I will do is I'll just say, look, I think we've got an issue. And then I'll drop a footnote. I don't have all the facts yet. I'm working on it and I'll get back to you. So it's not a surprise. So they can lodge that in the back of their mind. They know there might be an issue in timing or whatever it is, compliance or with a legal pleading. But then you commit to them, you're going to work to them and you work on it and you're going to get back to them. Now, if they're interested in it right away, they're going to start pinging you and asking questions about it. But that's where the judgment comes in, right? And so many times I've told a leader something I thought was horrible news. And little did I know they got like 150 other things they're dealing with. And, what I bring to them is, thank you, got it. But, it doesn't even reach the top 150, but I feel much better. And then I can always say, remember last week I told you X, here it is Y. This is what's going on now. And I think that's critically important. You're right. The worst thing you can do is hide something. The best thing you could do is go to somebody early and tell them and ask for help if you need it.
Yeah, 100%, because they don't age well, and problems get worse over time. And I think as a leader, so it's two people here, right? So the team member has to be willing to step up and say this is wrong or bad, right, even if they don't want to. But the leader has to set an environment where the truth is acceptable.
Yeah.
And if you take the truth that I give you and use it as a club to beat me over the head with, then okay, that's probably not going to happen again.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Clint, I'm sure you remember this is about 4 or 5 years ago. We were the state of South Carolina. They were building a huge nuclear power plants. I mean, the number one power company in the state was building 2 huge power plants. And lo and behold, about 6 years into the project, with probably about 50 or 60% of it complete, with a lot of cement poured and millions of dollars spent, they figured out that the project was overrun, was never going to be able to be completed, and was an engineering fiasco. And people went to jail for that. And I scratched my head saying, how many board meetings, how many committee meetings, how many operational meetings do people put up the chart with the bird on a wire and say, we're doing good, we're on time? I mean, who in that group, very brilliant leaders and smart engineers, should have said, this is not going to work. We are in, and at what point should they have said that? And I got to tell you, it should have been said a lot earlier than it was ultimately found out, because again, people went to jail. CEOs went to jail, right? So that's just a great example of nothing like that aging well over time.
No, it doesn't get any better. So as I joked earlier, you're quite free to share some of the mistakes you made in the book, and I was wondering, what lessons did you learn from how you handle those early mistakes and setbacks?
I think we talked about a little bit about it. Don't let it happen again, and then the ability to press the reset button and keep going, man. Because when you make a mistake and you're like, oh, this is horrible. You can be Debbie Downer or, have the pity party all day long and you have a bad attitude, and then stuff might just start cascading. You got to keep going. You got to pick it up. It might take a good night's sleep, as you mentioned earlier, just a good reset. I tell my kids that all the time. You have a bad day at college or grad school. Look, just put it down, go to sleep. It'll be better. It'll be better tomorrow. So, and then just remember those, and then pass along those lessons to other people. And that's really what I try to do in the book. And to be able, at some point, hopefully shortly thereafter, when there's been a recovery, to laugh at it. Just say, gosh, I can't believe that happened. That was not a good thing. You're not laughing at the time, but the ability to laugh later brings some positivity to life.
Yes, it's funny. When I was reading that in the book, this memory came back. And so in project management, we always preach earliest possible start, right? You should you should plan things for early, and then it gives you flexibility to move them to later, but don't plan for last allowable start, right? Plan for earliest possible. So this is my first job at the company, and we're working on the Atlanta Olympics for Coca-Cola, and this would have been 1994-ish, 95. And so in the corporate boardroom, or this what we call the war room, it was all this beautiful cherry wood, and you had to be really careful. And this was before they had the nice flip charts with 3M tape on the back. So we had to put butcher paper up, the old brown butcher paper up, and then we would use 3M spray and then put white paper on top of that to draw our models, our network diagrams. So my boss on Mondays, he's a retired sergeant major in the Marine Corps, and he says, Clint, I want you, where our meeting is Thursday, make sure you get the war room set up before the meeting. I'm like, okay, no problem. And I have other things on my plate, so I start doing those. So Wednesday, the day before, should be plenty of time, I go to get into the war room and set it up, and it's locked. And so I look around for somebody with the key, and there's an offsite meeting that day.
Yeah.
and there's nobody with the key. And this is pre-cell phone days. You're not just picking up the phone. So I couldn't get into I stayed till like 8 o'clock that night, hoping and praying somebody would come back, and they didn't. Next morning, Thursday morning, I'm there at, as you say, dark 30, right? I'm there first thing, and I'm just waiting. And the first person that walks in is my boss. He says, "Is the room set up?" And I said, "No, and here's what happened." He says, "Okay." He says, "I have a key." Like, okay, it's great. So we get in the room, he helps me set it up, and I think, okay, crisis averted. Because he didn't say anything else. And then about 3 days later, we shared an office, and he turned his chair around and says, "Clint, remember the last week when you didn't have that room set up?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "We preach earliest possible start. You need to live it." And that was one of those bell moments of like, okay, boom, I will always do. If I can do it today, I will do it today. Even if I got 5 other things on my plate,
right,
I'm going to try to get it done.
Yeah, it's amazing. And exactly, anytime we went somewhere with the Admiral, I would go there first, and I'd go there early, and I'd see, and I'd know which way, which hallway was open, where this was, where that was, how to get to X, Y, and Z. And that was critical. And I think so many people today just show up, and it's clear they haven't done anything, no due diligence, right? They don't have a clue. When I go in a conference room, I know who the people are. I know where the leader's going to sit. I know who's who. I've run through my presentation, and I just pull it up. I click through every single thing. I know whether or not the room is configured for audio. I typically don't use videos because you never know how those are going to play on the road. And then, the PowerPoint that you designed to look like this on their screen might look like that. So it's all that stuff that, once it hits you and you're standing up in front of the crowd, or, everybody's showing up at the war room and it's not ready, it's just way too late.
Yeah. Yeah. I do the things that you talk about in the book as well. And I think it's probably from the era we grew up in, but which was the pre-GPS days. Even though I have ways on the phone, I still, if I get to a location early enough the night before, I will drive to the place I'm going to be just to see what the route's like and see if there's anything I need to be aware of. And as opposed to just waking up in the next morning and hitting route and finding out that it's going to take 12 minutes to go 1 mile or something,
Yeah, I think that's so important. It does two things. One, it educates you on how to get there. And two, you go to sleep with a peace of mind. You're able to put that away and say, okay, I've got this, been there, done that. Any presentation at a major conference, I get there the night before, and the ballroom might not even be set up, but I just walk in the ballroom and get a sense of it, and just knowing where it is, knowing the presentation, maybe the stage will be set up if I'm speaking, is critically important. You get that level of comfort where the next day you're like, okay, I know I can get there in 5 minutes, and it's so much more confident about when you show up.
Absolutely. And it makes you calmer and better able to deliver whatever you're trying to do.
Right.
So what advice, we kind of talked a little bit about this earlier, but what advice would you give early career professionals about leading before they actually have authority? Sure. Obviously in the military, that's hard to do because you can't outranked everywhere around you. But in the corporate world, maybe this person outranks you, but how do you have authority with that person?
Gosh, I think it's really in your actions and doing what you say you're going to do. Be dependable. Be the person that or when somebody is looking for somebody to do the job, you just happen to be there and you execute, and then you do what you say you're going to do. Right? One of the most disappointing things you can have is ask somebody to do something. Hey, can you get it to me by Friday? And they say, sure. And then Friday at 8 o'clock, you don't have it. 9 o'clock, 10, you're looking at your watch. And then finally at 2 o'clock, they send you an email saying, hey, I'm not going to be able to finish this till Monday. Can I get some extra time? You talk about circuit breakers popping. It's just like, or you don't hear from them at all when it comes on Friday. I have a great example. I was working with an attorney at work, and she was getting ready to go out on 2 weeks of paid time off a couple weeks ago, and we were working on some documents and some edits. And she said to me, Mark, I'm going out of town on long-term family vacation to, I think it was Hawaii or somewhere, Big Island. And she said, but I will get these to you the Friday before I leave. And, it's the first time I've been working with her. She's an outstanding attorney. Well, no kidding, Clint. Friday morning, and she's on the West Coast, so there's a 3-hour time difference. But Friday morning at 9 o'clock, I'm thinking, oh boy, I bet you she's left and she's not going to get them. And bing, the email hits. all 4 documents are there, and they're all edited. I mean, just immediately, my opinion of her skyrocketed, right? Because not only is she a good attorney, but she performed and she did what she said she was gonna do in the time by which I needed it, because I wanted to work on them over the weekend, and I didn't have to ask for them. Now, that's not to say that something comes up. I always say, "Look, if something comes up with family or there's a crisis or emergency or please just say something, and we'll cover for each other." But the last thing you want is somebody that commits to doing something, or I commit to doing something, and at the last minute I say, "Hey, I need, another 3 days to do this." No one likes that. Especially, I know in project management in your business, there are deadlines for a reason.
Exactly. Yeah, I noticed one of your posts recently. You're speaking, I think, at Embry-Riddle, and I speak as well at colleges. And one of the things that I'm sure you never dealt with because you were such a strong performer, but that I get asked a lot is, how do you deal with the imposter bias? These kids are super smart, yet they go to their intern or they get their first job and they kind of don't feel like they belong. How do you have any suggestions for them how to avoid that?
Yeah, I just say, you're there for a reason. Everything happens for a reason, right? And as you mentioned earlier, I think in our discussion before we even started, even failure happens for a reason. So, I mean, it's okay. And it's so funny during some of the startup booms in the economy over the past 20 or 30 years. You and I have both seen this. I played it very conservatively, right? I was Navy, law school, judge, worked for a judge, law firm. Got scared to death to leave Charleston to go work for Delta Airlines and did it, but it was the best decision I ever made. Came back to the law firm and then got scared to death to go work for my current employer. Best decision I ever made. But there have been people that, have done, incredible things, taken high risk things and done them. And guess what? Even when they failed, they're standing on their feet, right? It's okay. There's recovery. You're still going to, a good person who has good work ethic, who knows how to accomplish the mission is going to be just fine. So I just encourage people that, go do it, do the best you can. Failure's not the end of anything. Matter of fact, it could lead you, as you and I discussed, as to where you should be. Our oldest daughter is going to get mad at me for telling this story, but you told one on your son. But she did 2 years post COVID. She did 2 years of work in interior design. Had a 4.0 and just said, it was a graduate degree, and said, "I just don't want to do this," and I said, "Okay, is you don't want to do it because it's hard, or you don't want to do it because you don't want to be an interior designer?" She says, "I don't want to be an interior designer." And I said, "Well, I wish you would have decided that at the first semester, but that's good." But Clint, she's back at the Medical University of South Carolina now after doing a doctorate in physical therapy and just loving it. So I was like, okay, find your niche and go pursue it. And if your work is not associated with the passion of something which you like, you're in the wrong business.
Yeah, then you just have a JOD.
Yeah, that's how you know it. That's what I would call the real imposter, when so many people in the law firm would say, we're just miserable for years and years and years. And they'd say, "Oh, you're so lucky." I said, "No, I'm not lucky. I just did something about it." I got to the point where I didn't think I was going to enjoy doing this for the rest of my life. And I decided it was time for a change.
Yeah, I got lucky in that respect because on the ship, we had a library because, again, this is pre-internet days. And I went, and there was actually a book that talked about careers and how much they paid. So I said, what's the highest paying gig I can get? Well, I was an airline pilot, so I can't do that. So what's next? And, luckily engineer was pretty high on the list. And that's something I'd actually wanted to be since I was about 8 or 9 years old, was an electrical engineer. So it just, luckily for me, it all played out. But as we wrap up here, what do you hope readers take away most from your book?
Maybe a couple things. One, I hope they take away this, what I call this concept of legendary leadership, right? Legacy leadership. So, if you read the book, you're either like me or you're at a more senior leadership place in your life where hopefully you're mentoring and giving back to people, or you could be like our children or a mid-level manager. And what I hope they understand is at either end of that spectrum, the actions you take and how you treat people and how you lead or how you follow will have long-lasting impacts on the rest of your life, right? And the other thing I say, which I'm a firm believer of, because people always say, the boss is terrible, can't stand the boss. I say, hey, you know what? You learn as much from a bad leader as you do from a good leader. Matter of fact, I'd say you learn more from the bad leader than you do from the good leader, because you learn what you don't want to be and what you don't want to become? And I just say, okay, again, you got two choices. If you're working for somebody and you're miserable, you can stay there and, outlive, outlast, which I've done a number of times, or you can put up or shut up and make a change. I just hope people understand that concept of legacy leadership. And for leaders, I hope they're striving every day to do that, to impart some of them into themselves into somebody else. So when they're long gone, they remember you. Or if you're trying to climb the ladder of leadership, hopefully there's some tips in those 18 chapters of stories that they'll say. And I've already had people say this. I've had people email me and say, hey, the other day I did X, Y, and Z because you said in chapter whatever to do this. And that's so humbling. It's like, I don't even know this person. And that's just a nice takeaway from writing a book.
Oh, that's great. That's what you live for, right?
Yeah.
So I'll wrap up with the final 3 questions I ask everybody, and these are quick answers. So, but are there any leadership principles that speak to you personally and guide your day-to-day behaviors?
Always do the right thing. Yeah, integrity and loyalty. And I say this in the book. Just takes a long time to build a reputation, as we all say. It takes 1 or 2 seconds and one dumb decision to blow it.
Yeah, that's on the news every day.
Yes, sir.
So, especially if you live in Atlanta and you're a Falcons fan.
Yes.
So,
or in the military, right? How many commanding officers and command master chiefs do we see automatically relieved for failure in their confidence of their leadership?
And you talk about that because from the outside, not knowing that world of being an officer, it always seemed a bit unfair to me. But if your boat runs aground and you're the captain, you're asleep, you had nothing to do with it, but you're the one that probably got relieved to command.
Right. Immediately.
Those tend to be career limiting.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Best piece of advice I've ever been given, and you'll appreciate this, when I was commissioned at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill in 1985 by my father, he said to me as he was pinning the ensign bars on my shoulders, he said, son, listen to your chiefs and take care of your sailors. He didn't say listen to the admiral and salute the officers above you. He said listen to your chiefs. And remember, for review, for those of you who aren't in the military, that's the senior enlisted position, right? The chiefs. And then take care of the junior person. And gosh, you do that, even in the corporate world, everything else happens. I mean, people like you and they'll work hard for you. They'll go to the end of the universe for you. That was the best advice I'd ever gotten.
And the final one is, what is the best book or article you read recently, and what was the key takeaway?
Oh, boy. I just finished The Gales of November, which talks about the Edmund Fitzgerald. It's a fascinating book. So if you remember the song, Gordon Lightfoot's song, and the takeaway there was, I guess, an analysis of risk and how hard do you push, which is, the same thing I think we talk about not only in my current job, but also in any major manufacturing corporation. And then what signals do you get that, somebody might be pushing too hard? And this was one where they were pushing and pushing and pushing and trying to get the most taconite across the lake. And they knew the bad weather was coming, but they're trying to beat the record they had. And just like somebody there should have said, you know what, we need to stop. But it was a absolutely fascinating book full of U.S. history and a lot of great personal stories.
Well, according to the song, 3 hours is what they needed. If they'd have set out 3 hours earlier, they'd have made it. I don't know.
It's amazing. Yeah, well, the great part about the book, the last 2 chapters talks about the personal relationship Gordon Lightfoot ended up having with the families, and just a fascinating book. And one of the things they say, this is an author. They say if you want to be a good author, you got to be a reader. You've got to read other examples of good literature. I prefer nonfiction to fiction, but it was just a really fine book, and I love the American history part of it and the takeaway in terms of at what point, they were lowering the water line of the boat so they could carry more taconite, so they could do this, so they could do that. So there was a race to who could do more every season, and and then the weather was horrible, and they're like, what, maybe we shouldn't have gone out that day.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Mark, this has really been great. I really appreciate your time today. It's always good to catch up with a shipmate. Thank you so much for the conversation.
Thank you, Clint. It's been my pleasure. I really appreciate your time.